Hello guys and gals, and this is part 25 of our reading of George Orwell's 1984. As always, we start with the copyright information, and I guess I can't quite turn to it right away. Okay, this doesn't want to stay where it's supposed to. But, anyways, we are going to, come on, okay, come on, there, okay. Copyright 1961, this is a 1961 copy of the book, and it says all rights reserved, including the right to reproduce this book or portions thereof in any form. So, okay, and in our last video, Winston was in bad shape. He was getting tortured practically every day, and so anyways, he had this vision, and I think that's where he left off, was this vision of this person in white looking at dials and them saying room 101. I'm pretty sure that's a vision because I don't think they're taking him to room 101 yet, but we're going to see. Basically, anyways, so yeah. There's also memories of another kind. They stood out in his mind, disconnected, like pictures with blackness around them. Okay. So these are all basically visions. They're not actually happening. At least this part is. And he was rolling down a mighty corridor, a kilometer wide, full of glorious golden light, roaring with laughter and shouting out confessions at the top of his voice. He was confessing to everything, even the things he had succeeded in holding back under the torture. He was relating the entire history of his life to an audience who knew it already. With him were the guards and other questioners and men in white coats, O'Brien, Julia, Mr. Charrington, all rolling down the corridor together and shouting with laughter. Some dreadful thing which had lain embedded in the future had somehow been skipped over and had not happened. Everything was all right. There was no more pain. The last detail of his life was laid bare, understood, and forgiven. Also, I need to say that this does get very, very violent, and if you're sensitive to that kind of stuff, then it's probably best not to watch this part of the video, because this does get very, very violent. Okay. He was starting up, he was staring up from the plank bed in the half certainty that he had heard O'Brien's voice. All through his interrogation, although he had never seen him, he had the feeling that O'Brien was at his elbow, just out of sight. It was O'Brien who was directing everything. It was he who set the guards onto Winston and who prevented them from killing him. It was he who decided when Winston should scream with pain and when he should have a respite, when he should be fed and when he should sleep, when the drugs should be pumped into his arm. It was he who asked the questions and suggested the answers. He was the tormentor. He was the protector. He was the inquisitor. He was the friend. And once, Winston could not remember whether it was in a drugged sleep or in normal sleep, or even in a moment of wakefulness, a voice murmured in his ear, "Don't worry, Winston. You are in my keeping. For 7 years I have watched over you. Now the turning point has come. I shall save you. I shall make you perfect." He was not sure whether it was O'Brien's voice, but it was the same voice that had said to him, "We shall meet in the place where there is no darkness," in that other dream 7 years ago. He did not remember any ending to his interrogation. There was a period of blackness, and then the cell, or room, in which he now was He did not remember any ending to his interrogation. There was a period of blackness, and then the cell, or room, in which he had gradually materialized. That wording was kind of strange. Around him. He was almost flat on his back and unable to move. His body was held down at every essential point. Even the back of his head was gripped in some manner. O'Brien was looking down at him, gravely and rather sadly. His face, seen from below, looked coarse and worn, with pouches under his eyes and tired lines from nose to chin. He was older than Winston had thought him. He was probably 48 or 50. Under his hand there was a dial with a lever on top and figures running round the face. "I told you," said O'Brien, that if we met again, it would be here." "Yes," said Winston. Without any warning except a slight movement of O'Brien's hand, a wave of pain flooded his body. It was a frightening pain because he could not see what was happening, and he had the feeling that some mortal injury had been done to him. He did not know whether the thing was really happening or whether the effect was electronically produced. But his body had been wrenched out of shape. The joints were being slowly torn apart, although the pain had brought the sweat out on his forehead. The worst of all was the fear that his backbone was about to snap. He set his teeth and breathed hard through his nose, trying to keep silent as long as possible. "You are afraid," said O'Brien, watching his face. That in another moment something is going to break. That something is going to break. Your especial fear is that it will be your backbone. You have a vivid mental picture of the vertebrae snapping apart and the spinal fluid dripping out of them. That is what you are thinking, is it not, Winston?" Winston did not answer. O'Brien drew back the lever on the dial. The wave of pain receded almost as quickly as it had come. "That was 40, said O'Brien. "You can see that the numbers on the dial run up to 100. Will you please remember throughout our conversation that I have it in my power to inflict pain on you at any moment, and to whatever degree I choose. If you tell me any lies or attempt to prevaricate in any way, or even fall below your usual level of intelligence, you will cry out with pain instantly. Do you understand that?" "Yes," said Winston. O'Brien's manner became less severe. He resettled his spectacles thoughtfully and took a pace or two up and down. When he spoke, his voice was gentle and patient. He had the air of a doctor, a teacher, even a priest, anxious to explain and persuade rather than to punish. I am taking trouble with you, Winston," he said, "because you are worth trouble. You know perfectly well what is the matter with you. You have known it for years, though you have fought against the knowledge. You are mentally deranged. You suffer from a defective memory. You are unable to remember real events, and you persuade yourself that you remember other events which never happened. Fortunately, it is curable. You have never cured yourself of it because you did not choose to. There was a small effort of the will that you were not ready to make. Even now, I am well aware that you are clinging to your disease under the impression that it is a virtue. Now we will take an example. At this moment, which power is Oceania at war with? When I was arrested, Oceania was at war with East Asia. With East Asia. Good. And Oceania has always been at war with East Asia, has it not? Winston drew his breath. He opened his mouth to speak and then did not speak. He could not take his eye away from the dial. "The truth, please, Winston. Your truth. Tell me what you think you remember." "I remember that until only a week before I was arrested, we were not at war with East Asia at all. We were in alliance with them. The war was against Eurasia. That had lasted for 4 years before that." O'Brien stopped him with a movement of his hand. "Another example," he said. "Some years ago you had a very serious delusion indeed. You believed that 3 one-time party members named Jones, Aronson, and Rutherford, men who were executed for treachery and sabotage after making the fullest possible confession, were not guilty of the crimes they were charged with. You believed that you had seen unmistakable documented evidence proving that their confessions were false. There was a certain photograph about which you had a hallucination. You believed that you had actually held it in your hands. It was a photograph something like this. An oblong slip of newspaper had appeared between O'Brien's fingers. For perhaps 5 seconds it was within the angle of Winston's vision. It was a photograph, and there was no question of its identity. It was the photograph. It was another copy of the photograph of Jones, Aronson, and Rutherford at the party function in New York, which he had chanced upon 11 years ago and promptly destroyed. For only an instant it was before his eyes, then it was out of sight again. But he had seen it. Unquestionably, he had seen it. He made a desperate, agonizing effort to wrench the top half of his body free. It was impossible to move so much as a centimeter in any direction. For the moment, he had even forgotten the dial. All he wanted was to hold the photograph in his fingers again, or at least to see it. "It exists," he cried. "No," said O'Brien. He stepped across the room. There was a memory hole in the opposite wall. O'Brien lifted the grating. Unseen, the frail slip of paper was whirling away on the current of warm air. It was vanishing in a flash of flame. O'Brien turned away from the wall. "Ashes," he said. "Not even identifiable ashes. Dust. It does not exist. It never existed." "But it did exist. It does exist. It exists in memory. I remember it. You remember it." "I don't remember it," said O'Brien. Winston's heart sank. That was doublethink. He had the feeling of deadly helplessness. If he could have been certain that O'Brien was lying, it would not have seemed to matter. But it was perfectly possible that O'Brien had really forgotten the photograph, and if so, then already he would have forgotten his denial of remembering it, and forgotten the act of forgetting. How could one be sure that it was simply trickery? Perhaps the lunatic dislocation of the mind could really happen, and that was the thought that defeated him. O'Brien was looking down at him speculatively. More than ever, he had the air of a teacher taking pains with a wayward, promising child. "There is a party slogan dealing with the control of the past," he said. "Repeat it, if you please. Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past," repeated Winston obediently. "Who controls the present controls the past," said O'Brien, nodding his head with slow approval. "Is it your opinion, Winston, that the past has real existence?" Again, the feeling of helplessness descended upon Winston. His eyes lifted towards the dial. He not only did not know whether yes or no was the answer that would save him from pain, he did not even know which answer he believed to be the true one. O'Brien smiled faintly. "You are no metaphysician, Winston," he said. "Until this moment you had never considered what it meant by existence. I will put it more precisely. Does the past exist concretely in space? Is there somewhere or other, a place, a world of solid objects where the past is still happening? No. Then where does the past exist, if at all? In records, it is written down. In records and in the mind, in human memories. In memory, very good. Oh, very well then. We, the party, control all records and we control all memories. Then we control the past, do we not? But how can you stop people remembering things?" cried Winston, again momentarily forgetting the dial. "It is involuntary. It is outside oneself. How can you control memory? You have not controlled mine." O'Brien's manner grew stern again. He laid his hand on the dial. "On the contrary," he said, you have not controlled it. That is what has brought you here. You are here because you have failed in humility, in self-discipline. You would not make the act of submission, which is the price of sanity. You prefer to be a lunatic, a minority of one. Only the disciplined mind can see reality. Winston, you believe that reality is something objective, external, existing in its own right. You also believe that the nature of reality is self-evident. When you delude yourself into thinking that you see something, you assume that everyone else sees the same thing as you. But I tell you, Winston, that reality is not external. Reality exists in the human mind, and nowhere else. not in the individual mind, which can make mistakes, and in any case soon perishes. Only in the mind of the party, which is collective and immortal, whatever the party holds to be truth is through the eyes. Truth. Whatever the party holds to be truth is truth. It is impossible to see reality except by looking through the eyes of the party. That is the fact that you have got to relearn, Winston. It needs an act of self-destruction, an effort of the will. You must humble yourself before you can become sane. He paused for a few moments as though to allow what he had said to sink in. Do you remember, he went on, writing in your diary, freedom is the freedom to say that 2 + 2 makes 4? Yes, said Winston. O'Brien held up his left hand, its back towards Winston, with the thumb hidden and the 4 fingers extended. How many fingers am I holding up, Winston? 4. And if the party says that it is not 4 but 5, then how many? 4. The word ended in a gasp of pain. The needle of the dial had shot up to 55. The sweat had sprung out all over Winston's body. The air tore into his lungs and issued again in deep groans, which even by clenching his teeth he could not stop. O'Brien watched him, the 4 fingers still extended. He drew back the lever. This time the pain was only slightly eased. How many fingers, Winston? 4. The needle went up to 60. How many fingers, Winston? 4. 4. What else can I say? 4. The needle must have risen again, but he did not look at it. The heavy, stern face and the 4 fingers filled his vision. The fingers stood up before his eyes like pillars, enormous, blurry, and seeming to vibrate, but unmistakably 4. How many fingers, Winston? 4. Stop it, stop it. How can you go on? 4. 4. How many fingers, Winston? 5. 5. 5. No, Winston. There is no use. You are lying. You are still thinking there are 4. How many fingers, please? 4, 5, 4, anything you like, only stop it, stop the pain. Abruptly, he was sitting up with O'Brien's arm round his shoulders. He had perhaps lost consciousness for a few seconds. The bonds that had held his body down were loosened. He felt very cold. He was shaking uncontrollably. His teeth were chattering. The tears were rolling down his cheeks. For a moment he clung to O'Brien like a baby, curiously comforted by the heavy arm around his shoulders. He had the feeling that O'Brien was his protector, and the pain was something that came from outside, from some other source, and that it was O'Brien who should save him from it. You are a slow learner, Winston, said O'Brien gently. How can I help it? He blubbered. How can I help seeing what is in front of my eyes? 2 and 2 are 4. Sometimes, Winston, sometimes they are 5. Sometimes they are 3. Sometimes they are all of them at once. You must try harder. It is not easy to become sane. He laid Winston down on the bed. The grip of his limbs tightened again, but the pain had ebbed away and the trembling had stopped, leaving him merely weak and cold. O'Brien motioned with his head to the man in the white coat, who had stood immobile throughout the proceedings. The man in the white coat bent down and looked closely into Winston's eyes, felt his pulse, laid an ear against his chest, tapping here and there, then nodded to O'Brien. Again, said O'Brien. The pain flowed into Winston's body. The needle must have been 70, 75. He had shut his eyes this time. He knew that the fingers were still there, and still 4. All that mattered was somehow to stay alive until the spasm was over. He had ceased to notice whether he was crying out or not. The pain lessened again. He opened his eyes. O'Brien had drawn back the lever. How many fingers, Winston? 4. I suppose there are 4. I would see 5 if I could. I am trying to see 5. Which do you wish, to persuade me that you see 5, or really to see them? Really to see them, again, said O'Brien. Perhaps the needle was at 80, 90. Winston could only intermittently remember why the pain was happening. Behind his screwed-up eyelids, a forest of fingers seemed to be moving in a sort of dance, weaving in and out, disappearing behind one another and reappearing again. He was trying to count them. He could not remember why. He knew only that it was impossible to count. 207, 208. Them, and wait, let me finish this. That it was impossible to count them, and that this was somehow due to the mysterious identity between 4 and 5. The pain died down again. When he opened his eyes, it was to find that he was still seeing the same thing. Innumerable fingers, like moving trees, were still streaming past in either direction, crossing and recrossing his he shut his eyes again. How many fingers am I holding up, Winston? I don't know. You will kill me if you do that again. 4, 5, 6. In all honesty, I don't know. Better, said O'Brien. A needle slid into Winston's arm. Almost in the same instant, a blissful, healing warmth spread throughout his body. The pain was already half forgotten. He opened his eyes and looked up gratefully at O'Brien. At sight of the heavy-lined face, so ugly and so intelligent, his heart seemed to turn over. If he could have moved, he would have stretched out a hand and laid it on O'Brien's arm. He had never loved him so deeply as at this moment, and not merely because he had stopped the pain. The old feeling that at bottom it did not matter whether O'Brien was a friend or an enemy had come back. O'Brien had come back, I see. O'Brien was a person who could be talked to. Perhaps one did not want to be loved so much as to be understood. O'Brien had tortured him to the edge of lunacy, and in a little while it was certain he would send him to his death. It made no difference. In some sense that went deeper than friendship, they were intimates. Sometimes, somewhere or another, although the actual words may never be spoken, there was a place where they could meet and talk. O'Brien was looking down at him with an expression which suggested that the same thought might be in his own mind. When he spoke, it was in an easy conversational tone. Do you know where you are, Winston? He said. I don't know. I can guess in the Ministry of Love. Do you know how long you've been here? I don't know. Days, weeks, months? I think it is months. And why do you imagine that we bring people to this place? To make them confess. No, that's not the reason. Try again. To punish them? No, exclaimed O'Brien. His voice had changed extraordinarily, and his face had suddenly become both stern and animated. No, not merely to extract your confession, nor to punish you. Shall I tell you why we have brought you here? To cure you, to make you sane. Will you understand, Winston, that no one whom we bring to this place ever leaves our hands uncured? We are not interested in those stupid crimes that you have committed. The party is not interested in the overt act. The thought is all that we care about. We do not merely destroy our enemies, we change them. Do you understand what I mean by this? He was bending over Winston, his face looking enormous because of its nearness and hideously ugly because it was seen from below. Moreover, it was filled with a sort of exultation, a lunatic intensity. Again, Winston's heart shrank. If it had been possible, he would have cowered deep into the bed. He felt certain that O'Brien was about to twist the dial out of sheer wantonness. At this moment, however, O'Brien turned away. He took a pace or two up and down, and then continued less vehemently. First thing for you to understand is that in this place there are no martyrdoms. There are no martyrdoms. You have read of the religious persecution of the past. In the Middle Ages, there was the Inquisition. It was a failure. It set out to eradicate heresy, and ended by perpetuating it. For every heretic it burned at the stake, thousands of others rose up. Why was that? Because the Inquisition killed its enemies in the open, and killed them while they were still unrepentant. In fact, it killed them because they were unrepentant. Men were dying because they would not abandon their true beliefs. Naturally, all the glory belonged to the victim, and all the shame to the inquisitor who burned them. Later in the 20th century, there were the totalitarians, as they were called. They were the German Nazis and the Russian communists. The Russians persecuted hearsay more cruelly than the Inquisition had done, and they imagined that they had learned from the mistakes of the past. They knew, at any rate, that one must not make martyrs before they exposed their victims to public trial. They deliberately set themselves to destroy their dignity. They wore them down by torture and solitude until they were despicable, cringing wretches, confessing whatever was put into their mouths, covering them with abuse, accusations, and sheltering behind one another, whimpering for mercy. And yet, after only a few years, the same thing had happened over again. The dead men had become martyrs. And their degradation was forgotten. Once again, why was it? In the first place, because the confession that they had made were obviously extorted and untrue. We do not make mistakes of that kind. All the confessions that are uttered here are true. We make them true. And above all, we do not allow the dead to rise up again against us. You must stop imagining that posterity will vindicate you. Winston, posterity will never hear of you. You will be lifted clean out from the stream of history. We shall turn you into gas and pour you into the stratosphere. Nothing will remain of you, not a name in a register, nor not a memory in a living brain. You will be annihilated in the past as well as in the future. You will never have existed. Then why bother to torture me? Thought Winston with a momentary bitterness. O'Brien checked his step as though Winston had uttered the thought aloud. His large, ugly face came nearer, and his eyes a little narrower. You are thinking, he said, that since we intend to destroy you utterly, so that nothing that you say or do can make the smallest difference. In that case, why do we go to the trouble of interrogating you first? That is what you're thinking. Was it not? Yes, said Winston. Okay, wait. We're going to stop that right here. Let me get my bookmark here. We've been reading. Well, let's see. We made it to page 210 or 211. I think 210. Anyways, we have been reading from George Orwell's 1984. If you like this content, make sure you like and subscribe and ring the bell so you know when I upload. And if you want to support me in any way, all that information will be in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.